For this season's Literature, Arts, and Lecture series. And we're very excited again to have our students present. If you guys can come down, we're trying not to sit any further than what you see here. Fill in. I see a lot of people are still coming in, so I'm going to still be obnoxious until people come sit forward all the way. If you can come on down too, that'd be great. Okay. Every semester, we end our series with the students who are in the English Honor Society, Sigma Kappa Delta. And they all, can you come on down, please? Come closer. Thank you. We're always excited about what they do. They always do something that just blows my mind. I can't believe that they're actually doing it. And this year, it's Shakespeare. So I'm really excited about it. And I want to just put a plug in. If you can come on down toward the front. A lot of people coming in the last minute. We're going to get them all seated. Come on down if you would. Yeah. Yeah. I'm already working on the next season, which is going to be exciting. I get excited before it even is all there on the page, but we've got some great performances. If you haven't signed the mailing list, please do so on your way out. And then look for our events starting the last Wednesday in September. It's always Deaf Awareness. We always start with that. And we always end the series with the students in the Honor Society, in the Sigma Kappa Delta English Honor Society. So if you really like what you see now, you can support the students again next semester. So I'm not going to say too much more. We all know Shakespeare's Macbeth, but we're going to hear more about it. And I'd like to introduce now the English professor who is in charge of this wonderful club, Anthony Rodriguez.
Good afternoon. Welcome. It's good to see you. I know this is a challenging time of year to be here with final exams and everything else. So I appreciate that. I've been telling my students all week long to not worry about the exams, because the exams are not going away. They're coming regardless. And that a lot of that anxiety, what it does during final exam period, is it throws a blanket over what you've learned. So things you've learned, you tend to forget. And then it builds a wall, so new information can't come in. But if you can learn to combat that anxiety, because largely it's you against you, it's not really anything else. You can remove that blanket and tear that wall down and actually have a great end of your semester. Beyond that, you're not in it alone. I mean, everyone is under a lot of pressure right now. But in our minds, we tend to think, I'm the only one that's really suffering and really stressed out, and that just creates and compounds the experience. I understand that everyone's under challenging circumstances, and by no means are you alone. We're in this together. Again, my name is Anthony Rodriguez. I was just recently hired as the new head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. I'm really excited about that, so I'll be leaving my post here relatively soon to take on that new responsibility. Sigma Kappa Delta is an extraordinary national organization. We have the Gamma Epsilon chapter here at Oxford College, and wow, it's been an endless cavalcade of very talented and gifted students over the years. And this group, Kim Villanueva, Sara Nares, and of course Denis Pagani, are amongst the most talented that we have had. Shall I say some nice things about me before I got up here, and it was nice to hear, but I have to be honest with you. This semester has been very, very busy for me. I've been extraordinarily occupied with many more committees than I normally have, and a lot of outside work. And Denis Pagani in particular, who is the president of Sigma Kappa Delta here at Oxford College, has quite literally led the group on her own. She called the meeting, she took care of the emails, she laid out a plan for this semester, planned this event, And she is an extraordinary leader, and I cannot wait to see where she ends up in the future. So it's nice to see my name on the marquee. It's nice to hear nice things, but honestly, I did almost nothing this semester. Virtually nothing. So thank you to all of you. One quick thing that I wanted to say about literature is that we're going through some changing times at this college, in this district, in the state, in the nation, and in the world, in that we're seeing declining enrollments in many of our literature courses. There are so many reasons that this could be happening, and to go into all of this would take a lot of time. But one thing is for certain, the study of literature in higher education is at a crossroads. And now is the time for us to take the initiative and renew our passion, renew our commitment, renew our skills of critical thinking, and forge new ground as it applies to the teaching and to the study of great literature. Many subjects have gone through a similar struggle over the years. I don't know if it's technology or the different kind of avenues we have for higher education, but we're seeing declining enrollments. I would like to make today a day and a moment where we turn a corner. And this little group that's here right now begins to foster a new appreciation and a new conveyance of literature. Many of you here are here because you've chosen English as a major. I myself teach English, as do my colleagues, Eric and others. And we had a moment, where the fire was ignited. I won't go into the details, but I can recall the exact moment when I was in college, and I had that second where I knew that I was going to commit my professional existence to the study of great literature. I'll never forget it. I'm 20 years plus in this profession, and that fire is raging. It's not just burning, it's not flickering, it's raging. And I would like to impart that same passion and commitment to you today, to listen to these fine students and to think about what literature means to you. That favorite book that you like to read, the first book that you read that brought your imagination to life, that miracle moment that can only happen with brilliant letters on a page. So with that, I want to thank you again for coming, and we can begin the event.
Hello everyone, my name is Denis Pagani of Sigma Kappa Delta, as Professor Anthony Rodriguez introduced. And I just want to thank you all for being here, like he said, for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We truly do appreciate it. And I would just like to say that Professor Rodriguez is far too modest. Without his support and encouragement of myself and my fellow Sigma Kappa Deltans, I would not be standing before you all today, because I would have never even fostered the role of president. So I just want to thank him sincerely for his unwavering commitment to the organization and to all of his students and the student body of Oxford College in general. So if we could give him a round of applause. And then I would like to also introduce my fellow Sigma Kappa Delta members, Kimberly and Sarah. Sarah is the secretary of our chapter, and Kimberly is the vice president. And again, without their contributions to not only this presentation, but all of the events throughout the semester, none of this would have been possible. And the improvements that we've made as a chapter would have been impossible as well. So I'd like to thank you both and give them both a round of applause, please. Finally, I'd like to recognize a fellow member who wasn't able to attend this event today. Her name is Gloria Rodriguez, and although she isn't here in person, she is here in spirit, for we do have her analysis that we contributed to what we will be reading to you all today. So a round of applause for Gloria, please. And finally, I would just like to thank you all again for being here, and we're going to go ahead and begin the presentation. So just take a few seconds. Thank you. So Kimberly's going to go ahead and begin. We're going to begin with a character analysis of the two main characters of Shakespeare's Macbeth, which are Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and then we'll continue with an analysis of the play itself.
In Shakespeare's play Macbeth, the main character, who is a war hero, portrayed as a loyal, brave warrior, but once he is told the prophecies of his future and receives the news he will one day be king of Scotland, his motives and loyalty quickly change. Macbeth becomes conflicted with himself throughout the play. He ultimately lets his greed and ambition overtake him, which leads to his demise. Although Macbeth is seen as a traitor, he is also loyal, ambitious, and morally conscious. As the play progresses, Macbeth and loyalty seem to drift apart. Although Macbeth does what it takes to become the new ruler and betrays the king, he ultimately stayed loyal to his wife. Once Macbeth changed his mind about murdering the king, Lady Macbeth convinces her husband to stay focused and keeps his word. While the majority believes that Macbeth did what was morally wrong, which it is, he kept his word to his wife. The couple both planned out their scheme without uneasiness of either one revealing their intentions, even though they both have malicious objectives. They didn't turn against one another. Macbeth, since the beginning of the play, demonstrates ambition by the way he becomes a war hero and brutally kills MacDonald. Then he continues on to defeat the Norwegians. On their attempted invasion further in the play, Macbeth describes how ambition has vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. By this, he acknowledges his ambition might lead him to destruction, because ambition, according to Macbeth, makes people rush and get ahead of themselves. Macbeth eventually kills the king, but before the deed is completed, Macbeth contemplates with himself why he shouldn't kill the king. He concludes that he's not only the ruler, but he is also his relative, and for the night Macbeth is his host. While still debating with himself, he thinks about the people that will be affected by the tragedy. Upon the slightest couriers of the air shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that treats shall drown the wind. Macbeth acknowledges that his plot is despicable, and that because the king was a remarkable leader, his death will bring sadness throughout the kingdom. This all proves Macbeth is morally conscious of the situation. But just because you know right from wrong, it doesn't mean people often do the right things. They first decide how the outcome will benefit or harm them, and from there, people usually decide what is morally right for them. Although Macbeth is seen as a traitor, he is loyal, ambitious, and morally conscious. People don't always make the right decisions, but eventually, whatever we decide, Macbeth is proof that we will pay the consequences of our actions regardless if they are good or bad. Macbeth has been a prime example of a good person turned wicked by self-perseverance. Although it is hard to believe, we all have a Macbeth inside us, which at any moment, depending the situation, would cause us to reject our moral compasses and pursue our self-interest. And now over to Sarah, or to Denise.
I'll be doing a character analysis of Lady Macbeth. I took a little bit of a feminist approach, I suppose you shall see. Lady Macbeth reinforces what it meant to foster a leadership role as a queen in the 17th century society via her tactful manipulation of Macbeth and his men. Lady Macbeth manipulates those around her to her benefit, and she exercises full control over her husband by way of her assertiveness. Macbeth provides a better illustration of the way Shakespeare seems to appeal to the prevalent misogyny of his time while undermining it through the manipulation of artistic technique or form. While portraying Lady Macbeth negatively, Shakespeare is able to diminish the potential right that our character within the play represents. That being a dominant wife, a demanding queen, and a vindictively manipulative and malevolent woman. As a writer, Shakespeare questioned, challenged, and modified the typical representations of women during the Renaissance. Lady Macbeth, for instance, managed to persuade Macbeth to commit murder amongst several other sins with her mere use of language, further asserting the incredible power she fostered in her ability to manipulate the men in her life. Macbeth lacks the mental strength and independence that Lady Macbeth is the epitome of. Initially, Shakespeare uses Lady Macbeth as a mirror image of the typical representation of an iniquitous woman in order to deceive the reader into embracing the alternative roles depicted throughout the play between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. From Macbeth's desperate need to satisfy his wife to Lady Macbeth's imposing character over that of her husband's. The fact that Lady Macbeth is able to persuade Macbeth to do as she pleases, a man so powerful both in strength and manner, demonstrates the uncanny mental strength that Lady Macbeth possesses. In order to engage the reader, Shakespeare indeed presented Lady Macbeth as an evil persona, but throughout the length of the play, he encouraged the reader to compensate for her shortcomings by causing pity for her tragic downfall as both a queen and a wife. In turn, Shakespeare allowed there to be room for interpretation on the reader's part as to who the true villain in the tragedy was, which he ingeniously illustrated as a combination of both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, portraying them as reverse images of one another. Shakespeare raised questions about the standard images of males and females, about the characteristics of each gender, about the definitions of masculine and feminine, and about how each gender possesses both masculine and feminine qualities and behaviors, and about the roles women and men should play in acting out the stories of their lives. In the end, Lady Macbeth's ambition and resolution, her dissimulation and cunning, her presence of mind, and her power and affection became her leading characteristics, which played a pivotal role in her death. And now I will allow Kimberly to begin us in an analysis of the actual play itself. We will be doing it in acts. Kimberly will analyze acts 1 and 2, Sarah act 3, and myself the closing acts. Thank you.
In Act 1 of Shakespeare's play Macbeth, it becomes quite clear who the main characters are and what roles they each take in order to pursue their ambitions. The main character in Act 1 is Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, King Duncan, the Three Witches, and Banquo. Throughout Act 1, we will analyze each scene and the major events that occur within them. The play first starts with the Three Witches planning their next meeting. They decide they will be meeting when the battle is over in an open field where they will meet Macbeth. The witches in the first scene give some foreshadowing on what to expect from the characters throughout the play. Fair is foul and foul is fair. This small quote from the play is extremely significant because if you translate it to modern day language, it means good is bad and bad is good. What the witches mean by this is that things might not always be how they appear to be. Although some people might seem like a good person, that doesn't necessarily mean they are. A bloody messenger comes with great news from the king. He explains how Macbeth has defeated the rebel leader Macdonald. The messenger describes the gruesome death of Macdonald. He unseamed him from the nave to the chops, and fixed his head upon our battlements. In other words, Macbeth split Macdonald from his navel to his jawbone and stuck his head on the castle walls. Soon after he receives this news, another messenger comes bearing even greater news. Macbeth, he tells the king, of the attempted invasion by the Norwegians that was stopped by the Scottish army and Macbeth. He also told the king that the Thane of Cawdor helped the Norwegian king plan the invasion. King Duncan reacts to the news by rewarding Macbeth with the new title as Thane of Cawdor. By the end of Act 2, Macbeth has fully gained the trust of the king. One way this is evident is by the reaction to the news where he says, "O valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." With this statement, you can fully understand why King Duncan trusts Macbeth blindly, because he's not only his nobleman, but they are also relatives. After the battle that had taken place, Macbeth and Banquo made their journey back to King Duncan's castle. While on their journey, they encounter for the first time the Three Witches. The witches share their three prophecies, which is that Macbeth will become Thane of Cawdor, and then soon after will be King of Scotland. Banquo, curious of his future, asks the witches what his future would be like. The first witch tells Banquo, lesser than Macbeth and greater. The second witch continues, not so happy, yet much happier. And the last witch bluntly reveals to Banquo, thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So hail Macbeth and Banquo. Soon after getting the prophecies, the witches vanish with no explanation. Two messengers, Ross and Angus, arrive and inform Macbeth to give thee from our royal master thanks, only to hurl thee into sight, not pay thee. And for an earnest of a greater honor, he bade me from him call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition hail most worthy Thane, for it is thine. Astonished by the news, Macbeth now believes the witches. After the first prophecy is fulfilled, Banquo finds it all strange and explains why he feels that way. Often to win us to harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. This quote expresses that the agents of evil often tell us part of the truth in order to lead us to our destruction. Every day we are persuaded by people around us and by the things we are told, but it is up to us to evaluate everything crucially. As soon as Macbeth and Banquo reach the king's castle, they are immediately thanked for their bravery, especially Macbeth, of course. Duncan then announces Malcolm, his son, will be the next king. This catches Macbeth by surprise, since the witches predicted otherwise. He thinks to himself, what must he do? This is a step which I must fall down, or else overleap, from in my way it lies. Macbeth is now determined to do what it takes to be the king, and since Malcolm is the next heir to the throne, Macbeth can either accept he won't be king, or get rid of Malcolm. Lady Macbeth receives a letter from her husband explaining to her what has happened while he was gone. Lady Macbeth is worried that he doesn't have what it takes to seize the crown. Lady Macbeth is willing to do anything to ensure Macbeth has the crown. Informed that the king is coming over to their castle, she prays to the spirits that assist murderous thoughts. Unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of dearest cruelty. Although Lady Macbeth knows her plan is malicious, she doesn't want to feel remorse for her crucial intentions. Although Lady Macbeth coaches her husband on how to act when the king arrives, she urges him to look like the innocent flower, but be like the serpent under it. By this, she is telling Macbeth to be ready to strike as soon as the moment is right, without hesitation. But to keep a calm manner, because Macbeth is transparent and their plan could be revealed. Duncan finally arrives to Macbeth's castle and is greeted by Lady Macbeth. Duncan, while asking to be taken to the Thane of Cawdor, confesses to Lady Macbeth his feelings towards him. We love him highly and shall continue to grace towards him. Due to Macbeth's triumphs in battle, Duncan has no reason to distrust in him. On the contrary, he has all the reason to feel safe with Macbeth, which is why he ironically describes Macbeth as his favorite, without the slightest clue of the plan that the wicked couple had plotted against him. While Lady Macbeth has gone to greet the king, Macbeth is contemplating if he should go through the plan. Macbeth has two reasons why he doesn't want to kill the king. First, I am his kinsman and his subject. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Macbeth knows he shouldn't kill the king, but his thirst for power gets the best of him, so he decides to look for a motivation that will help jumpstart his ambition. Unable to find motivation, Macbeth refuses to carry out with the murder, but Lady Macbeth insists she has a plan to frame the servants for the death of the king. This settles Macbeth's nerves, so he agrees to continue with the plan. As of now, the witch's prophecies are set in motion. So I will also be reading Act 2, and this is Gloria's analysis. So Act 2 begins at night in a torchlit pathway, with Banquo explaining to his son Fleance about his restlessness due to nightmares. However, they are interrupted by Macbeth, and a servant suddenly enters. He is astonished by Macbeth being awake at this late hour, and further explains to them about his new dream involving the three witches. Ambiguous words. Macbeth lies he doesn't think about them now and reminds him that they must talk more about it. He suspiciously adds, "If you stick with me when the time comes, there will be something in it for you." Banquo agrees to do anything Macbeth asks of him as long as it does not taint his consciousness. He then leaves with Fleance, wishing Macbeth an easy rest. Immediately he commands his servant to notify Lady Macbeth to strike the bell when his beverage is ready. Once his servant leaves, Macbeth begins to see a levitating dagger facing towards King Duncan's room, but fails in attempt to acquire it. He becomes tense and eerie. However, he concludes its cause is from his own uneasiness. Suddenly the bell chimes, and he interprets it as a sign to commit the sinful deed. Macbeth left the hall. Lady Macbeth enters, gloating about successfully incorporating narcotics into the King Duncan's guards' alcoholic drinks. She contemplates on killing Duncan herself instead of Macbeth doing it, but the fact that he resembles her father in his sleep doesn't settle with her. However, she is interrupted by a noise and immediately thinks of the worst scenario that could have possibly happened. Macbeth reappears, terrified, with his hands covered in blood, declaring to her he has done the deed. While attempting to calm him down, she noticed he is still holding onto the dagger, so she commands him to place it next to the intoxicated servants. He refuses to go back into King Duncan's room because he heard noblemen praying in their sleep and animal screeches, so she took initiative and did it herself. She then told him, "My hands are of color, but I shame to wear a heart so white." Upon returning, they both heard distant knocking sounds increasingly getting louder, and decided they must head back to their bed chambers. The knocking continues as a porter stumbles to open the gate, revealing two Scottish noblemen, Lennox and Macduff, who have been ordered to coordinate the king's departure. Macduff particularly questions the porter's lazy manner. He clarifies to him that he was intoxicated the past night. Coincidentally, Macbeth enters, greeting them good morning, and both noblemen ask if the king is awake. He responded that he wasn't yet and suggested that Macduff can wake him. Meanwhile, they briefly talk about the chaotic night. Politely, Macduff accepts his offer and does so, returning soon afterwards, declaring in despair, "The worst situation imaginable is amongst us. Someone has murdered King Duncan," and he rings the alarm bell. Lennox and Macbeth are flabbergasted by the horrible news and go see the tragedy for themselves. As Lady Macbeth, King Duncan's three sons, and Ross enter, Macduff frantically notifies them of the murder. Once Macbeth re-enters, he announces that he has killed the two guards who were responsible for failing to protect King Duncan, and revealed they also murdered him because there were bloodstains across the beds and the dagger used was found with them as well. This triggers Malcolm and Donald Bane, so they converse between themselves about fleeing from the castle instead of meeting up in the hall with everyone else. Later, another Scottish nobleman, Ross, enters with an old man. Macduff joined them, providing updates on the progress of King Duncan's murder and how his kingship has passed on to Macbeth, and also explains how the two of King Duncan's sons are accused of assisting the guards due to their fleeing. As of now, Macbeth has fulfilled the three witches' prophecies.
In the royal palace at Forres, Banquo begins to contemplate the coronation of Macbeth as well as the prophecies of the Weird Sisters. Macbeth enters, followed by his queen, Lady Macbeth, and the court. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth ask Banquo to attend the feast they will host that night. Banquo accepts their invitation and says that he plans to go for a ride on his horse for the afternoon. Macbeth mentions that they should discuss the problem of Malcolm and Donalbain. The brothers have fled from Scotland and may be plotting against his crown. Macbeth begins the soliloquy. He ponders on the subject of Banquo, reflecting that his old friend is the only man in Scotland whom he fears. He notes that if the witch's prophecy is true, the son of Banquo may become heir to the throne of Macbeth, for his will be a fruitless crown. The murder of Duncan, which weighs so heavily on his conscience, may have simply cleared the way for Banquo's sons to overthrow Macbeth's own family. The servant re-enters with Macbeth's two visitors. Macbeth reminds the two men, who are murderers he has hired, of a conversation he had with them the day before, in which they chronicle the wrongs Banquo had done them in the past. He asks if they are angry and manly enough to take revenge on Banquo. Macbeth reminds the murderers that Fleance must be killed along with his father and tells them to wait within the castle for his command. It is dusk, and two murderers, now joined by a third, linger in a wooded park outside the palace. Banquo and Fleance approach on their horses and dismount. They light a torch, and the murderers set upon them. The murderers kill Banquo, who dies urging his son to escape and to avenge his death. One of the murderers extinguishes the torch, and in the darkness, Fleance escapes. The murderer sleeps with Banquo's body. In Act 3, scenes 1 through 6, two main themes presented in Shakespeare Macbeth are greed and excessive ambition. Many people crave power and recognition, and they allow their ambitions to drive them to the brink of insanity. Prevalent in our society, there are two kinds of individuals. One who knows how to overcome their obstacles and obtain their goals by struggling and risking what is important to them. On the other hand, what is important to them, and one who refuses to take the stairs, the hard path, and takes the elevator, the easy path instead. These type of people are those that don't mind pushing people out of the way, as long as they are satisfied with themselves and their accomplishments. In a way, one can perceive such individuals as being selfish, because as long as they are content with their life and their purpose within it, they don't care what harm they bestow upon anyone else. In the play, Shakespeare, excessive ambition and greed are two common themes that relate to our society. In the play, Macbeth is portrayed as a selfish and greedy ruler who sends two servants to eliminate Duncan and Banquo, who the witches prophesied to be prospective kings in the near future. Yet, to escape fate, Macbeth sends to kill them because he wants to be seen as the only king of Cawdor and Thane of Glamis. He feels no remorse in killing anyone as long as he gets what he wants, because selfishness is a part of humanity and is the driving force behind everything we do. We can relate to this because personally in our society, there are those greedy people that try to keep you from prospering. But one cannot let anyone impede one from achieving one's dreams. One has to put that negativity aside and distance themselves from those people. I believe individuals can compare themselves to Banquo as well, because even though he had hope that the witch's prophecies would come true, he never did anything cruel like Macbeth did to achieve that position on the throne. The message is that even though many of us try to escape fate, there will be consequences like there was with Macbeth, by living with a guilty conscience. The message that I personally believe Shakespeare displays through his play is to never try to be better than anyone else or envy them, because you are your own competition. We should not always be eager to have what is not in our possession, because there are things that we aren't destined to have. Some will work harder to attain the things they desire, and some will just have it all without having to risk anything. Thank you.
As Act 4 carries on, the witches further present the themes of doubling and equivocation, trust, deceit, imagination, the human conscience, and reality that are intertwined within the play. Macbeth takes the apparition's words at face value, forgetting to examine how their predictions could potentially come true, for not all that one hears is particularly what it may seem. Macbeth deems the witches trustworthy, which is ironic considering his own nature. Shakespeare presents reflections of all of the main characters within that of Macbeth, presenting the many shades of the human soul which bestow balance upon one. Banquo represents the part of humanity which desires to fulfill certain ambitions, but his conscience will not allow it, for it would not only be costly to his own being, but that of those surrounding his. while Macbeth projects his true evil in his actions. Banquo hosts such evils within him and refuses to allow them to be exposed. Lady Macbeth is a representation of the price to pay for living in a fantasy, for it is a fantasy to believe that one may progress solely at the expense of others. As Macbeth's internal demons begin to cause decay to his being, Lady Macbeth is the driving force that allows him to persevere. But her manipulative manner eventually seizes the only reality she knows, leading her to commit suicide. The main characters within Macbeth themselves wear their own masks and conceal their own faults. Macbeth initially conceals his true self in order to persuade and deceive others to fall prey to him, disguising his motives behind a mask of loyalty. Lady Macbeth portrays herself as the damsel in distress quite often in order to use her femininity as a form of influence upon men in her life, including but not limited to her Macbeth. The witch's predictions are a labyrinth of loose and dead ends. The witch's destiny for Macbeth was deemed truthful in the end, but it was not an honest faith. For the woods did come marching, but they concealed hundreds of soldiers, and a man not born of a woman did come knocking, but not in the sense what one might imagine. For he was not of supernatural descent, but a human being who was simply not birthed conventionally by standards of the Elizabethans. Macbeth became so engrossed in his miserable existence that tragedy was not only inevitable, but also acceptable. When he received the news of Lady Macbeth's death, he disregarded the matter as if it was of no relevance. After all, Macbeth paid with his life for his sins, and a new ruler and a new fate were established. Until Act 5, Macbeth had been tormented with visions and nightmares, while Lady Macbeth had derided him for his weaknesses. Lady Macbeth's dissolution was swift. As Macbeth's power grew, indeed, Lady Macbeth's decreased. She began the play as a remorseless, influential voice that dwindled to a mumbling sleepwalker, capable only of a mad and rambling speech. As the play neared its bloody conclusion, Macbeth's tragic flaw came to the forefront. Like Duncan before him, his character was too trusting. He took the witch's prophecies at face value, never realizing that things are seldom what they seem. It was Lady Macbeth's manipulative manner that led her to take her own life, for she came to realize that her pointless existence spent inflicting pain upon others to ensure her husband's success was all the more minimized to existing solely for herself after losing her husband's trust. She was overcome with feelings of loneliness and regret, eventually leading her from her path of betrayals to a path of remorse. She was remorseful for having pushed her husband away, and she was inflicted with guilt for having turned him into a true murderer. For because of Lady Macbeth's tactics, he no longer killed for selfless reasons, but for selfish reasons instead. She became overwhelmed by her own immorality until her unbearable truths could no longer be veiled by her meticulous lies, and her only outlet was to take her own life. Macbeth allowed himself to be manipulated, initially by Lady Macbeth, but later by his own yearning for power. Not power in the sense that he would be able to impact the lives of others as king, but power in the sense that he wanted no one to compare to him. If he could not be the epitome of greatness, then no one would be. What Macbeth did not take into account, however, is that fate cannot be changed. The river of time thus flows on, despite the struggles of man. If one relies solely on the demise of others in order to fulfill one's own ambitions, one is bound to be stricken by the truth of existence, and one will face internal consequences of a guilty conscience which may push one to the brink of insanity, and external consequences like the contemplation and completion of suicide, whether that be by a self-inflicted wound or a series of actions that were bound to lead to death at the hands of another man. Further, one should be cautious about one's desires and pursue solely those deemed worthy of pursuing. For leading a life in the darkness, inflicting pain upon others for self-gain, will eventually become an all-encompassing fate from which one may never recover. Thank you. And now we would like to open up the presentation to a bit of a Q&A or commentary series, so if any of you are interested in speaking or asking a question, just raise your hand. Anyone at all? I mean, don't jump out all at once.
your generation, my generation, the future, we did as well. Is there anything you see within the fabric of the play that gives you a moment of pause or concern about what your generation is representing?
Well, a couple of the major themes were greed and selfishness, which I think is prevalent regardless of the generation and regardless of the time and place in society. I mean, you know, we see it in present day, and I feel like even those of us that, I may speak for myself on this end, but even those of us that, you know, try to commit major, you know, selfless acts versus selfish acts, you still, just the fulfillment of those acts themselves are what is our driving force versus per se the positive outcome that we're impacting upon others. So in a sense that could be viewed still as a form of selfishness, but I think besides those two major themes, another one would probably be, you know, success at the expense of others. Instead of building each other up, we have a tendency to tear each other down in order to look better or, you know, be more for the sake of self-gain and self-preservation and self-knowledge and so forth, which, I mean, frankly, naturally, we all know that it's wrong. We all know that that should not be the case, but it's evident regardless of the time period that it still exists. So I would say that's just a couple of the major themes that are certainly present regardless of whether it's, you know, during the Shakespearean era or during this one. But I'm not sure if you would like to add anything, either of you.
I would actually. Betrayal is one of the major themes, and we see it go on every day, and I'm pretty sure every single person in this room could relate to that theme, betrayal. If it's from, hey, can I have a ride, and no one shows up, or etc., whatever it might be in a small form or big, we were eventually, or have been, or eventually will be betrayed.
Would you like to
Yes.
I'd like to dovetail on that, on the theme of power
Mm-hmm.
that we see so strongly in this play and in our society. So I just want to throw that out there and hear what you have to say about that. And we see it in political arenas, and we see it a lot of political arenas, but also just in daily life. So you can comment on that.
I think even just if we steered clear of the, you know, very controversial political arena, we see it in academia as well. You know, I feel like students are sitting in a classroom and they're not there for the knowledge that is to be gained. They're there for the grade. You know, they're constantly concerned with, oh, am I going to pass this class? Am I going to get an A? You know, for those of us that are overachievers. Versus what message is this class going to convey? What am I going to gain from this? You know, we're in this institute to learn, yet we leave here, you know, sometimes entirely unfulfilled, frankly. And why? A lot of times because it's based on something as minor as, you know, a grade that you weren't expecting on, say, a research paper or something along those lines. And again, it comes down even to assignments. You compose an assignment based solely on the requirements set forth by your professor, and only because, you know, this is what they want to see, not because this is what you truly believe or this is how you truly feel. And although, you know, that's a fine line that you're walking, because in certain fields of study, naturally the answer is the answer regardless of the question. There's only one right answer. But in other arenas like philosophy and English, where your interpretation and your analysis genuinely counts, I feel like a lot of students are more willing to hinder their thoughts for the sake of ensuring an A or a B or whatever the case, whatever you're satisfied with. And beyond that, power above one another, you know? I feel like, I mean, personally, with my involvement on campus via different organizations, beyond Sigma Kappa Delta, you know, like student government and a couple of other societies and organizations, I've come to notice that students aren't necessarily there for the experience and for the wisdom and knowledge that they can gain from their fellow members, which is how I believe it should be. But instead, you know, I am better than you because I foster this leadership role in this organization that you do not. and whatever you say is irrelevant to me. And I feel like that happens a lot, and it's sad to say, but it is fairly common. So I do think that power is a drug that we as humanity has a tendency to feed off of, because in a sense it fills a void or emptiness, a null perhaps that we possess, but that isn't necessarily the way for it to be fulfilled.
I would agree with that. I can't even add anything to that. That was so beautiful, yes.
Any other questions? Or, I'm sorry, did you want to elaborate any further?
Oh, no, but I have something else I'd like to ask.
Of course.
Okay, so if you could write a letter to Lady Macbeth, giving her advice or giving, some sort of a commentary on what's going on, what would you say?
To Lady Macbeth?
Yeah, what would you say to her if you could write a letter to her?
What can I say to her? I would probably say to... I do not know. I would definitely tell her that she can't just focus on herself, because other people do get affected by other people's choices. It's a chain reaction, what happens. Your choices, you think, only affect yourself. Let's say texting and driving, right? But once you hit someone, that no longer just affects you, it affects the other person. So it will continue on and on. So just think about others, not just yourself. Because you might think you're gonna be happy, but eventually it led to her downfall.
I think that her character is very interesting because although she is very selfish in her manner and the way that she manipulates others and treats others and uses others to her advantage, she also is living entirely for her husband, She lives through him. So as selfish as she may be, every act that she commits throughout the entire play is just to ensure his safety and security on the throne. So I feel like she's a character that's very conflicted with what she needs and what she wants and what she's yearning for and what she wants to attain. Therefore, she chooses instead to focus on how she can see Macbeth prosper and what she can do to aid him along his journey versus focusing on her own shortcomings and what she needs to work on for herself. And I think that for that reason, when she loses Macbeth later on in the play, she loses all of herself, which, leads her character to unravel and eventually commit suicide. So I think that personally, if I had any advice to Lady Macbeth in particular, it would just be to live her own life and to be an individual of sorts, because living through someone else will only be successful for so long. Professor Boyce.
I'd like each one of you to address yourself as a woman in that age. If you could, where would you slide yourself into that society of Macbeth? Where would you really like to be? And then move yourself into this century, and where would you really like to be as a woman? Understand the question?
Can you repeat the first part for me, please?
You're in Macbeth's time, but
Okay.
you're a woman who you have the freedom of choice to go anywhere in that society that you want to leverage yourself. And then I like to know why you would go there. And then you're a woman today in this society, and you have leverage to go anywhere you want. Where would you go, and why would you go there in this society?
Okay. I think I know what I would do instead. In Macbeth's era, I would probably just want to be like a servant because everything that's going on is just men rule at that time. We need to keep that in mind. Men rule. So for Lady Macbeth to have like a big part in the play and the actions that Macbeth takes was usually not heard of. So I would definitely just rather be a bystander in that time. But now in modern age, I want to become a lawyer and maybe I guess it's a sense of power, but I love to kind of talk and argue. So yeah, that's where I would want to be in that time and where I plan on going in the future.
For me, I think that, I mean, not to focus solely with the characters within the play, but, and I don't want to say that this is out of a sense of power and authority. It's not necessarily that, but it's just knowing the way that, women were treated in that era and the little power that they did have. Naturally, I think I would want to foster a role where, at the very least, I could influence someone who is powerful, someone who has meaning within that society. So I would probably choose to be someone like Lady Macbeth, definitely not with her attributes, but in her position of power, so that I would be able to somewhat easily influence my significant other and the king, perhaps playing a role in the advancement of, women in society, which I think in present day would probably transfer over to president, but I don't know that I would ever intend on fostering that role, not because I don't think it's wonderful, but because, I want to teach, so. I suppose that's my answer to that.
And for me, I agree with Kim. I would honestly want to be a servant as well. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, I said I agree with Kim. I would honestly want to be a servant as well, because like Denise was saying, Lady Macbeth was selfish and she just cared about herself, and she lived, we could say she lived for Macbeth, and Macbeth was the one, guiding her. And I don't know, in today's world, I feel like I would want to be, oh my god, I want to be so many things. But honestly, I want to inspire others. I don't want to be a follower, and I feel kind of that's what Lady Macbeth was. I want to be a leader. And I don't want to say I want to be like Macbeth, but I want to inspire others. I want them to, we're here right now, and I know a lot of you guys are here just for the extra credit Professor Rodriguez might be offering, or whatever it is. But I want you guys to honestly get something from this, What I was talking about earlier is there are many people that are constantly telling you guys oh, you can't do this, oh, why are you doing this? Or if you tell them what your goals are in life, they put you down, And it's very hard to find true friends nowadays that truly motivate you and that are there uplifting you or whatnot. But yeah, I would just want to be someone that motivates individuals to, I don't know.
To prosper.
Yeah, to prosper.
Jose?
Another thing that Macbeth talks about is prophecy. I feel as though that's something that's also relatable in a lot of ways. Mostly in the sense that society, there's this sort of unspoken prophecy for all of us. And it pertains mostly to, it goes into more specifics, but as minorities, if you're Mexican, if you're Black, if you're Asian, there's that unspoken expectation for you just because of whatever you are. You're a woman, you're a man. What would you have to say about that?
I mean, could you elaborate a little bit on what you're referring to as the unspoken expectation of, say, gender roles or racial, ethnic backgrounds?
Right. Because nowadays people aren't so outspoken about it because of political correctness. But there's that sort of pressure from society, or when you're actually being honest about your goals and stuff, there's that sort of, oh, you're poor, you can't do this, or, you have to be realistic. And it could be from people you trust, it could be from someone you're reaching out to. Does that clarify?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent.
I think it's kind of like stereotypes, right? Like those stereotypes are in a sense the prophecies which lead you to your future. I think, right? Is that kind of in a sense?
I feel like for anyone, it would just be to not allow yourself to be barred within the restrictions that are placed on, you know, anything that you may correlate with, whether that be racial, ethnic, sex, you know, gender, religion, and so on and so forth, political beliefs, whatever the case. You know, I'm a prime example of the fact that, you know, through hard work and dedication, regardless of where you came from, you can achieve great things. I mean, I won't go into depth about that, but, you know, my parents were immigrants, like many people's parents on this campus were or are, and it just goes to show that even, you know, coming from a small community college in Oxford, you can go on to do great things. We have had plenty of leaders in the past, you know, and I just feel like defying those stereotypes and defying the expectations that are placed on those predicaments is just vital in order to ensure that we can break those stereotypes and we can progress beyond that, and that we are not defined by society's norms and terms. I don't know if that at all covers your question, but
I think where there is a will, there is a way. So each one of us are here because we want to be here. Regardless, let's say you want that extra credit, you wanted it, so you're here. So if you want to do it, you can do it, regardless if someone tells you every day, all day, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're not going to learn. If you think, yeah, they're right, and you just kind of dwell in all that, of course, you're not going to be that person, you're going to become those stereotypes. But if they tell you you're dumb, you're stupid, and you're like, no, I'm not, like, I'm better than that, I know I am, you will prosper.
I was just wondering what you might see as some of the balancing blocks to perhaps that word power comes across as negative, it also can be positive. I think of some of the game changers in history, perhaps Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa. What kinds of building blocks help an individual to achieve power and use it in the ways that you're speaking of to motivate and inspire?
I think, okay, well, throughout Shakespeare's Macbeth, power is demonstrated with, you know, an extremely negative connotation, which is kind of what we've been elaborating on. But again, a yearning to help others, not just to help yourself, to improve society, you know, and just a true passion and focus on the well-being and, you know, those around you, I think is what would provide the necessary motivation to foster a powerful role, whether that be, you know, in your community, you know, on a statewide level, on a national level, in order to use your power in a positive manner.
I would definitely agree with Denise. I think you just have to care. I think that's the foundation. Caring. Like, genuinely caring. Because if you pretend, like a lot of politicians, they say they care, but when it comes down to it, who's funding their campaigns? You know, in that sense, I feel like you just have to care. That's just the foundation for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with something, you know, you mentioned plenty of wonderful names throughout history, but just with something as minor as, you know, not minor, I don't want to say that, but, you know, smaller in expansion as community college. You're able to foster leadership roles here on campus, and you may use them as you please. So you may impact the student body in a positive manner, or you may foster this leadership role because, oh, there's going to be a $2,000 scholarship for the Elizabeth Foundation, but I'm going to do absolutely nothing all semester because I don't care. You know, it's really up to you. I mean, me personally, you know, I started tutoring long before I even considered fostering a leadership role within the English Honor Society, and tutoring students in English and seeing them progress, and, you know, middle-aged mothers who came back to school that I was helping with their English so that they could pass, English 96 to get to English 101 and English 102, and seeing their writing improve and seeing how happy that made them, and how grateful they were because they were now going to be able to graduate or whatever, because they were able to fulfill those English requirements that they were beyond dreading for the last decade and a half while they were raising their child. It's a beautiful thing, and so I think the fulfillment of helping others is what will eventually encourage one to want to foster a powerful leadership role, again, whether that be in an organization or on a wider level, in order to be able to reach the lives of many more. So, that's just my perspective there.
On that note, let's give him another.